Happy New Year. Happy New Year. Come on. Yeah, that's what we say now, right? We're in that in-between zone. I looked at a lot of you this morning. I could tell. One person even said, I have Christmas lag this morning. It's like jet lag for Christmas. But you made it. 2014 is done. You are here. And what a weird year 2014 has been. It's a lot of weird things. That ALS Ice Bucket Challenge is a weird kind of thing, isn't it? I mean, it is so weird. I mean, it did so much good. Millions were raised for that thing, but who writes that down on the back of a napkin? Who's sitting at McDonald's one day and is like, I've got the best idea. Let's take perfectly good water and for charity, dump it in the ground, so that we don't have to give. That's a good idea, but hey, it worked. What a weird year. I love at the end of the year when you go through all the Google topped search things. It's so interesting, like what we Googled. Like this year, the top celebrity that we Googled was Jennifer Lawrence. She was our top celebrity. Anybody have an idea what the top place, the most Googled place in the world is? You got an idea? Walmart, right? Makes perfectly sense. I mean, they sell everything. So Walmart's the top place. Ford was the most searched car brand. The most Googled diet is the paleo diet, the one where you eat like sticks and twigs and that sort of thing. The most Googled calorie search. This blew my mind. Like the thing that people say calories in whenever you're just looking up, the most Googled calorie search is for a banana. Isn't that interesting? What a weird thing. I would have thought like apple pie, ice cream, something you're trying to like cheat on a little bit. Like, how many calories really does a slice of pizza have? No, I guess we were more interested in how many calories a banana has. The most Googled sporting event was the World Cup. That kind of makes sense, right? It only comes every 4 years. It's a global kind of thing. Flappy Birds. Have you ever played that game Flappy Birds on your phone? What a ridiculous game that is. If you want to lose a lot of life, download that on your phone. But that actually is the most Googled game. The movie Frozen was the top search item. That kind of makes sense. But then again, also Pharrell Williams' hat was a top searched item as well. If you know that guy, that hat is super tall. 2014 is done. We're here. We made it. Christmas is over. You just got to make it through New Year's. We get to start it all over. What I love about this time of year, this particular window, we've got like this week between Christmas and New Year. Whenever you get something done, whenever you accomplish something, there's normally that breath after. You know what I'm talking about? It's like that post-workout breath, that post-challenge breath, where you just kind of breathe deep. You're just like, we made it, right? There's just that deep. Can you just breathe in? Just breathe in. Just let that out. You made it. It's that time of year where 2014 is almost done, but 2015 is like a week away. We're almost there. We're like there. And so almost in that same breath, what do you do before you get ready to do something, right? It's that deep breath in. Right before that workout, you're like, all right, let's do this. And you step into it. And so this time of year for me, it's kind of both things. It's like we've accomplished something great. There's another year in the books. We made it through the holiday season, and I hope it went well for everyone. And then there's that sense that there's something new coming. 2015 is around the corner, and I think it is going to be one of our best years ever. So with that sense of like breathing in, I want to share with you a story. And the story comes from Acts chapter 18, and I want to read through this because I think that God has something for us, something for this in-between space, something that tells us that we made it, and yet something that tells us that we can do it again. Because I believe that with God, we can accomplish anything. We can go, we can do, we can go for it. We couldn't do it on our own, but with God, we can do it. I think it's a promise. I think it's something that we can hold on to, and I think it's something that we'll find in the scriptures. And so I want to read this passage to you. It's from Acts chapter 18. And this is a passage about this guy named Paul. Paul is a missionary. Paul is a guy who, when he started out his journey, he hated Christians. He hated the Lord. he was violently opposed against them. And he had an experience with God that changed his whole world. And he went from violently opposed to God to being one of God's best ambassadors in all of history, who went forward and proclaimed the message of Jesus. And this is a story of him doing that. See, Paul's been in Athens. Athens is a huge city in Greece, and he's been doing a good work there. And he's about ready to leave Athens and head to this town called Corinth. And this is the story of what happens when Paul goes to this town, Corinth. So this is what the scriptures say. After these things, he left Athens and went to Corinth. And he found a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus. And having recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had commanded all the Jews to leave Rome, he came to them. And because he was of the same trade, he stayed with them, and they were working. For by trade, they were tent makers. And he was reasoning in the synagogues every Sabbath and trying to persuade the Jews and Greeks. But when Silas and Timothy came down from Macedonia, Paul began devoting himself completely to the word, solemnly testifying to the Jews that Jesus was the Christ. But when they resisted and blasphemed, he shook his garments and said to them, "Your blood be on your own hands, I am clean. From now on I will go to the Gentiles." Then he left there, and he went to the house of a man named Titius Justus, a worshiper of God, whose house was next to the synagogue. Crispus, the leader of the synagogue, believed in the Lord with all his household, and many of the Corinthians, when they heard, were believing and being baptized. And the Lord said to Paul in the night by a vision, "Do not be afraid any longer, but go on speaking and do not be silent, for I am with you, and no man will attack you in order to harm you, for I have many people in this city." And he settled there 1 year and 6 months, teaching the word of God among them. But while Gallio was proconsul of Achaia, the Jews with one accord rose up against Paul and brought him before the judgment seat, saying, "This man persuades men to worship God contrary to the law." But when Paul was about to open his mouth, Gallio said to the Jews, "If it were a matter of wrong or a vicious crime, O Jews, it would be reasonable for me to put up with you. But if there are questions about words and names and your own law, look after it yourselves. I am unwilling to be a judge in these matters." And he drove them away from the judgment seat, and they all took hold of Sosthenes, the leader of the synagogue, and began beating him in front of the judgment seat. And Gallio was not concerned about any of these things. Paul, having remained many days longer, took leave of the brethren and put out to sea for Syria. It's a pretty cool story. Paul is on his way to Corinth. There's this town called Corinth. Corinth is a Greek-Roman city. This is a strategic, awesome place for Paul to go. All the trade goes through this city. This city had been recently rebuilt. It still had that kind of new car kind of smell to it. All the trade went through there. All the money went through there. A lot of culture went through there. And so Paul wants to share the message of Jesus. Paul has big plans. He wants to see everyone come into relationship with Jesus. And so he goes to the place that he knows would be the most strategic for him to go. He left Athens, big city. Now it's time to go to Corinth. Makes perfect sense. And when he gets there, he happens upon a couple of people. Priscilla and Aquila are there. They are from Rome. Rome is where Paul wants to eventually end up and go. And so they kind of tag team. And it's kind of cool because they're all tent makers. Paul is a tent maker. That's what he does by day to help him to be able to share the gospel by evening and by night. And so Paul is there as a tent maker, connects up with these other tent makers. They're all followers. So he finds himself here in Corinth. And every single day, he goes out and he shares the gospel of Jesus. He finds people that he can talk to. He goes to the synagogue where people would come together and where they had religious questions. And it was the perfect environment for him to go. And he goes there and he shares the message of Jesus and what Jesus has done. And one day, Paul's traveling companions, Timothy and Silas, end up coming down. They end up coming to Corinth. And Paul says, this is the perfect opportunity. The groundwork has kind of been laid. It's time to really up our game. And so the scriptures actually tell us that Paul devotes himself completely to the word, solemnly testifying to the Jews that Jesus was the Christ. You get this idea that maybe he took a couple of weeks and he didn't make tents anymore. He just had this time where he was like, you know what? I'm going to let go of that. My guys are here. The stage is set. It's really time to up our game. It's really time to share this message of Jesus. And so he does that. He ups his game. But Paul is an experienced missionary by this point in time. Paul knows exactly what happens whenever you start to rustle the feathers of the religious leaders from city to city to city. He knows that it's the second you start to proclaim that Jesus is God, that there are some people who are not going to be very happy about that, who are not going to like what he has to say. And so he goes and he does that, and he ups his game, and he's sharing who Jesus really is. And wouldn't you know it, he knew the religious leaders kind of come against him. And so Paul says, okay, that's fine. If you don't want the gospel, I'm going to start opening it up to everyone. It's not going to be about just going to the synagogue. I'm going to start taking it out into the streets. And that's what he does. He finds this guy. His name is Titius Justus. That is a Roman name. That's as Roman as a name could get. You picture this guy's got to be some burly gladiator guy. I'm Titius Justus, that kind of persona to it. And he goes there. He stays with this guy. He shares the gospel with him. And Titius believes. And this thing starts to catch. It starts to catch like wildfire. People are accepting Jesus Christ. As a matter of fact, the text even tells us that there's this guy named Crispus. Now, Paul's been going to the synagogue the whole time, but this message of Jesus is starting to catch within the city, and it's catching so fast that this guy, Crispus, he's a leader within the synagogue, and he says, man, there is something happening here. And even this guy, Crispus, comes to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, that Jesus is Lord, and he accepts that, and it says his whole household even accepts that. Paul knows, listen, it's only going to get worse from here. He knows on the inside, the second this message starts to get out, there are going to be people that oppose this. The text doesn't tell us that's what's going on inside of Paul, but this is what the Lord does. The Lord knows what's in Paul's heart. And so it says that the Lord comes to Paul in a vision in the night. And in this vision, this is what the message that the Lord has for him. Do not be afraid any longer, but go on speaking and do not be silent. Because here's what Paul's thinking. Is it time for me to head out? Have we laid the groundwork? Everybody's looking to me. Have we shared enough? Is it time for me to move on to the next town before somebody ends up killing me? Because at this point in Paul's journey, he's been driven out of towns before. They have literally picked up rocks and gone to stone him, and he's having to flee for his life. And this has got to be what's going on inside of Paul. Paul's wondering, is this the escape time? Have I handled enough? Can I not handle anymore? Is it time to pull that escape lever? And is it time to move on to the next town and to see where that goes? And God says, no, Paul, that's not what I want you to do. Don't be afraid at all. God tells him, I've got you. I've got your back. You are protected. Paul, you have no idea of the resources that I have. I have people in this city that you do not even know about. And so Paul is emboldened by this. The text tells us afterwards, and he settled there 1 year and 6 months. So you have to assume that within Paul, he goes from thinking, should I go, should I leave? He's got that fear kind of thing, to where he settles there for 1 year and 6 months. Then the text has one of those great words. I love it in a story. It says, but, right? It's like, but. So everything's going good, 1 year and 6 months, but then something happens. This guy, Gallio, was proconsul of the whole region of Achaia. And the Jews with one accord were rising up against Paul before him and brought him to the judgment seat. So here's what happens. A mob ends up coming together. I mean, you're talking pitchforks, burning stakes. I mean, that whole kind of thing. This mob kind of is raised up. And they want Paul's head. They want him gone. They want him done. They want him out. They want him dead. And so they bring him to the one place that they think they can get that done. The judgment seat. And what it is it's an elevated platform. It's this place, it's kind of like their courtroom. It's this elevated platform in the middle of the city, this place that you would go, you would stand on top, and you would give speeches. You would talk from it. You would be elevated, kind of like the way that this stage is here. And it had a chair on it. And that chair is the judgment seat. And what would happen is the local ruler, the person from that area, the person who was able to make those decisions, they would sit on that judgment seat and they would hear the cases that the people were bringing to them. And they would decide who is guilty and who is not. And so this mob brings Paul all the way up to this judgment seat. They push him down. You have to figure this is a violent thing. You have to figure that they are mocking him. All of these things are going on. They throw him down before the leader and they make their accusations. And then all of a sudden, there's that moment of silence, that like brief pause in a conversation. You know, that moment where you know, okay, it's my turn to talk. And Paul then, what does he do? What do we do right before we talk? You draw in that breath, right? This is a breath moment. This is that moment. Something is going to happen. So Paul breathes in. You have to think that in this moment, he's trying to figure out, he's got milliseconds. He's been ripped away from whatever he was doing. This group brought him here. He's got milliseconds to decide what he's going to say. Do I lead right out of the gate? Do I share the gospel so that the proconsul will know why I'm here and what this is really all about? Do I tell them? Do I do a character assassination against the people who have brought me here? Do I say, I don't understand what these people are all about or why they brought me here? What do I say? Do I go on the offensive? Do I go on the defensive? There's all of those things. Paul takes that breath in. He's ready to act. He's ready to talk, but he doesn't get the chance. What ends up happening? This proconsul, this man Gallio, says to the Jews, if it were a matter of wrong or a vicious crime, O Jews, it would be reasonable for me to put up with you. But there are questions about words and names in your own law. Look after it yourselves. I am unwilling to be a judge in these matters. This is so cool. Paul takes that breath in. He's ready to go. He's ready to step forward. He's ready to say something. His mind is moving 1,000,000 miles an hour. But he has to say nothing. He has to say nothing. Why? Because God has people in this city. And all of a sudden, here's this Gentile leader, this non-Jew. This guy's not a believer. But God has a man for Paul. And he speaks up and says, listen, I don't know what you're here about. You're arguing over words and phrases and who this Jesus is. I will not judge over this matter. You want this guy's head? You can't have it. At this judgment seat, Paul is not guilty. This infuriates that mob. The mob goes out. They're so furious that this guy, Sosthenes, he's a leader within the synagogue. They want the head of someone. They're so riled up, if they're not going to have Paul's head, they're going to have this guy's head. And so it says they literally drag out their own leader and beat him in the streets. Gallio just lets it happen because he doesn't care, really what happens in the middle of it. They went after Paul. They ended up turning on their own leader. And I think in this story, there's something for us. Because I believe that God offers the same protection to us that he offers to Paul. See, I believe with all of my heart that with Jesus, we are invincible. That there's nothing in this world that can take one breath from us. And that there's nothing in this world that can add one breath to us. That every day that we have is numbered. And I believe that we can step out and that we can do great things. That we can accomplish much for God's kingdom. And that it won't be easy. It won't be quick, clean. It wasn't for Paul. But that in the end, we are protected by the King. This is so important. And one of those things, when we step up to that, when you think about that, can I step out? Can I be that bold? It kind of feels like sometimes it's intellectual suicide to do that. Like, really, you want me just to jump off the cliff and to trust and to believe? You want me just to trust God. So I'm just supposed to do this and trust, and I'm free falling, and somewhere in the middle that he'll catch me. And the short answer to that is, yes, there is an element to it. We have to have faith. We have to believe. We have to have faith. This is who God has demonstrated himself to be. But God wants us also to use our minds. He wants us to understand. So he has told us how we are protected. You see, there's this nature that makes us up. We are body, we are soul, and we are spirit. And these elements the scriptures talk about, they make up really who we are. Our body is our physical self. That our bodies can be hurt. We have scars, right? Our soul, the easiest way to think about that is kind of like our emotions, our feelings, our thoughts. Everything is seated in that. The scriptures talk about our soul. It says, it'll say things like our souls are troubled. God's soul is troubled. That feeling of trouble, where does that come from? It comes from our soul. Our emotions are kind of there. Our emotions can be damaged as well, right? We can have emotional scars. But there's this element of our beings, this spirit that we have within us. This part of our being is the part that's designed to communicate with God. It's the part of us that's designed to reach out to him, to connect with him. It's the part of our being that tells us that there's more out there to the world than just what we can see and touch and feel, that there's something else there. That's our spirit kind of crying out within us. That's the part that God has designed to be able to relate with him. When we have a relationship with God, when we follow him, it's our spirit that connects with him. And God does something amazing when we do that. When we accept Jesus into our lives, he protects that. See, our physical selves can be scarred. Our emotional selves can be scarred. But in Jesus, nothing can touch our spiritual selves. Nothing can get there. The Father has us. As a matter of fact, Jesus is trying to share this in many passages. One of them is a famous one in John chapter 10. I'll read it to you. He says, "My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. I give eternal life to them, and they will never perish, and no one will snatch them from my hand. My Father, who has given them to me, is greater than all, and no one is able to snatch them out of my Father's hand. I and the Father are one." What is he talking about there? He's saying, listen, I bought and paid for these people. I have sealed them, that spiritual part of them. You are mine. Jesus says, it's like you were in my hand. He uses this metaphor. It's like I'm the shepherd and you're the sheep kind of thing. He says, Jesus says, you are in his hand, and that there is no power on earth that can take you from the Father's hand. You're protected, like the shepherd protects the sheep. And you see, God was teaching Paul something through this story. God was saying, Paul, if you will step out, if you will do what you know you should do, if you will take those steps, if you will walk in that direction, I have you protected. And that as you feed that spiritual nature, as you come and as we walk this relationship out, guess what's going to happen, Paul? From that protection, you're going to get bodily protection at times. You're going to get emotional protection at times. It's not going to be perfect, but you don't understand, Paul. They can't harm you anymore. There's nothing that they can do. They can bring you before and they can throw you down. You can get cuts and scrapes. They can say things to you that will hurt. And I guarantee you, Paul experienced that. But at the end of the day, Paul, you have no idea the resources that I have. You are protected. They can push you down, but they can't harm you. They can't touch you. We are protected by the King. And guys, this has implications for our lives. It means that we can go and do things that we didn't think that we could do. We can try things that we don't think are even going to turn out the right way. We can try it because God is going to help us to see it through. And so here's my charge to you. We're going to talk about stuff. Next week, we're going to talk about where we want to go as a church. This is the time of year where you even think about where you want to even go personally. And wherever you land with those things, whatever resolutions, the stuff that we're going to talk, I'm so excited for next week. You've got to make sure that you're here to hear the plan for how we're going to reach the community and what we're going to do here as a church. It is so good. You've got to make sure you're here next week. And when you hear those things, and when you think about the decisions that you want to make, you have to know you are protected by the King. It doesn't matter how big it is. It doesn't matter how hard it seems. You will make it. God will see you through. And so here's the charge. Try new things. Try new things. Step out. Try something that seems so hard and believe that God will be there for you. Try something original. Think about something that nobody has ever even thought of before. Ask God, where's my Corinth? Where's that place? Where's that place that makes perfect sense for me to be? I want to go there, and when it gets scary, I want to trust you, God, knowing that you have my back in the middle of it all. Where is it, God? And I promise you, he will show you. I promise you, he will lead you. Because after all, he's the good shepherd, right? That's what the shepherd does for his sheep. There's one last thing I want to leave you with. They took Paul to the one place that they should have never taken him to. The mob came together, they grabbed him, and they brought him to this place called the judgment seat. And this is the place where they got to decide, was he guilty, was he not guilty? And they talked about the things that he said, and they talked about the things that he had done. And the Jewish people that had brought them there were wanting with all of their might to hear the guilty verdict for Paul. They had brought him there. They thought this was going to be cut and dry. They were hoping that when all of his life was analyzed, that somebody would say, this man, this Paul, is guilty. But you see, the scriptures talk about this judgment seat idea. Every Greek town would have had it. So they talk about this in many different places. And you see, this judgment seat kind of idea, this is the whole reason why Jesus has come. Everything that we celebrated on Christmas about God coming here to earth, if you are new to Christianity, if you're wanting to know what our story really is, it's that Jesus came to earth. God came to earth and he lived a life that was perfect. He went to this cross. They took him, just like Paul, they took Paul to the front. They were wanting him dead. They wanted Jesus dead in the same way. And so they took him to this cross. And on this cross, God made a deal. God said, your life, all the things that if you think about your past that you've done, God said, I will trade you my life, the life that I've lived, the perfect life that Jesus had here on earth. I will trade you that life for yours. You need to experience no guilt. You need to experience no shame. None of those things should last. There should be a flash in the pan because I have forgiven you. I traded my life for your life. You see, they were hoping that they could bring Paul up to one of those decisions and that he would get a guilty verdict. But because of his relationship with Jesus, there was no guilty verdict to be found. Paul was declared clean. Paul was declared innocent. And I don't know what your year has been like. I don't know where you've gone, where you've come, whether there are regrets this year. Things that would hold you back even from taking that step, from saying, God, I'd be open to anything that you have for me. But here's what you've got to know, that in Jesus, you are clean. In Jesus, you are forgiven. In Jesus, you are not guilty. And you can hold on to that. There is nothing that can take that away from you.
They wanted to find that guilty verdict for Paul, and sometimes we want to find that guilty verdict even for ourselves because we know what we've said, we know what we've done. But the reality of relationship with God is that you are clean. And so if you are new, if you don't know that you have that relationship with God, we want to invite you into that. What would it look like to follow him? To be willing to try new things? To be willing to have God on your side? To be protected? To be able to step out and to do things that you would never have even dreamed, knowing that the God of the universe is on your side? What would that look like? Or maybe you're here today and you think about making those decisions. You're like, but I've tried, but you have all those but statements that kind of come in. Maybe today the biggest thing you can do is just realize you are clean. You are forgiven. Doesn't matter what 2014 really looked like because Jesus paid for it all. If you lived every day perfectly, Jesus paid for that the same way as if you lived every day and messed it up. And the biggest thing you can do today is say, God, you know what? On this last Sunday of the year, I just ask you to forgive me, and I know that it's done, and I can't wait to see what 2015 has to offer me. And we take that breath in, and we step into it.